Los Angeles has always been a city that understands performance. Danger is supposed to stay on the soundstage, behind the stunt rigs, inside the scenes where everything is rehearsed and the chaos is controlled. But in the early 2000s, the danger that moved through the streets of Hollywood wasn't something a director called action on. It wasn't a stunt or a setup. It was a man who blended into neighborhoods, lived among young women, and walked around like a shadow no one noticed until it was too late. A man the world would later call the Hollywood Ripper. But long before Los Angeles gave him that name, his story started in a quiet Midwestern suburb almost a decade earlier. In August 1993 in Glenview, Illinois, 18-year-old Trisha Pacaccio spent the night out with friends. She was kind, bright, heading into her future, and coming home after one last summer hangout before college. Sometime during the night, either late on August 13th or early on August 14th, she was attacked just steps from her back door. Her father found her the next morning on the porch. She had been stabbed multiple times in a brutal assault that stunned her neighborhood. Police canvassed the area, interviewed everyone close to her, and built a case they hoped would break quickly. But nothing pointed cleanly to a suspect. No one was arrested, and the case slowly moved into cold file territory. What no one realized then was that a teenager from the neighborhood named Michael Thomas Gargiulo would soon leave Illinois behind and carry the violence with him to Los Angeles. Gargiulo moved west in the late 90s, drifting into the Hollywood area and picking up work as an air conditioning repairman and a bouncer, two jobs that gave him access, the kind that led him into homes, into apartment buildings, into social spots where young people lived and gathered. Co-workers later described him as someone who could be both helpful and oddly intense. Neighbors would eventually say he hovered too close, watched too carefully, inserted himself too easily, but at the time, none of it seemed dangerous enough to call the police. It just felt uncomfortable, and discomfort alone doesn't show up in police reports. By 2001, Gargiulo was living near Ashley Ellerin, a 22-year-old fashion student who lived in a small Hollywood home near Franklin Avenue. She was social, outgoing, and excited about life. On the night of February 21st, she had plans to go on a date with actor Ashton Kutcher. He stopped by her house to pick her up, knocked on the door, got no answer, and eventually assumed she had already gone out or changed plans. Inside the house, Ashley had already been killed. She was stabbed 47 times in an attack so violent that seasoned detectives were shocked by what they saw. There was no forced entry, no robbery, no sign of a struggle at the doorway. Whoever came into that house came in fast, and with a level of rage investigators couldn't easily explain. For years, no one connected Ashley's murder to anyone specific, but neighbors remembered something later that suddenly felt important. A tall, quiet man who watched her house too often, someone who seemed to be around when she came home at night, someone they thought was strange but not criminal. That someone was Michael Gargiulo. 4 years passed. Then, in 2005, in El Monte, California, 32-year-old Maria Bruno was murdered in her apartment. She had only recently moved into the building. She was attacked in her own home with the same kind of frenzied violence detectives had seen in Ashley's case. Dozens of stab wounds, no forced entry, nothing stolen, but this time the killer left behind something he hadn't left before, a surgical booty print near the bed. A small detail, but one that would later help link the crime scenes together. After Maria Bruno's murder, Gargiulo stayed in Los Angeles County. People who knew him said he grew more unpredictable. He showed up at odd hours. He inserted himself into conversations he wasn't part of. He hovered around apartment buildings where women lived, but he hadn't been arrested, and nothing tied him to any violent act on paper. He was just another face in a city full of them. Everything changed on the night of April 28, 2008. In a Santa Monica apartment, Michelle Murphy, a 26-year-old woman, woke up in bed to the feeling of someone attacking her. In the chaos and shock of those first moments, she fought back. She kicked and clawed and grabbed at the man who was on top of her. During the struggle, he cut himself with his own knife. Then, in a sudden split-second decision, he fled the apartment. Michelle survived, and the attacker left something he had avoided leaving for nearly 15 years: his blood. Santa Monica police collected the DNA and ran it. The profile came back fast. The blood belonged to Michael Gargiulo. Detectives realized they weren't dealing with one attack. They were dealing with a man they believed had murdered Ashley Ellerin, a man they believed had murdered Maria Bruno, and a man Illinois detectives had long suspected in the killing of Trisha Pacaccio back in 1993. When law enforcement arrested Gargiulo at his Santa Monica home, they found a man who had been hiding in plain sight for years. A man who inserted himself into the lives of women, watched their routines, and learned their habits. A man who positioned himself close enough to seem ordinary and far enough not to trigger alarm. Investigators from Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and Cook County, Illinois, compared evidence. They built timelines and layered witness interviews, forensic reports, DNA matches, and behavioral patterns. Piece by piece, the trail connected. Gargiulo's trial in Los Angeles finally began in 2019, nearly 26 years after Trisha Pacaccio was killed. The courtroom was filled with media, families, detectives, and the people who had lived through the attacks. Ashton Kutcher took the stand and described the night he went to pick up Ashley Ellerin, only to assume she wasn't home. Michelle Murphy testified with extraordinary strength about fighting off the man who attacked her in the dark. Forensic scientists walked jurors through the DNA match from Santa Monica. Illinois investigators presented parallels from the 1993 killing. The jury found Michael Gargiulo guilty of murdering Ashley Ellerin and Maria Bruno, and guilty of the attempted murder of Michelle Murphy. In 2021, a judge sentenced him to death in California, but the case wasn't finished. In 2024, after years of legal process, Gargiulo was extradited to Illinois to finally stand trial for the murder of Trisha Pacaccio, the attack that started his entire known timeline. After decades of silence and suspicion, the case that had haunted her family for more than 30 years was finally ready to move forward. Today, the story of the Hollywood Ripper sits inside one of the darkest corners of Los Angeles history. A story about how a man can hide inside a city of millions by staying quiet and ordinary. A story about how violence can move from one coast to another without anyone realizing the pattern. A story about how one night in Illinois, one night in Hollywood, one night in El Monte, and one night in Santa Monica were all connected by a predator who believed he would never be caught. Los Angeles didn't know it was living with a serial killer until the night someone fought back, until the night a man who had slipped through the cracks for years finally left behind something he couldn't take with him. A drop of blood on a Santa Monica floor that ended a streak of violence stretching across states and decades. And that's how the Hollywood Ripper was finally pulled out of the shadows and into the light, not by a task force or a confession or a lucky break, but by one woman who refused to die quietly and fought hard enough to leave behind the evidence that changed everything.